Populists usually say, I have the answer. I will fix the war. I will fix the economy. Millet has given these fantastic speeches in Davos and very recently in the UN. I mean, the really critical test is, will he respect the rule of law? But both the UK and the US have lost their senses.
Welcome to the Institute of Economic Affairs. My name is Kristian Niemietz and I'm the Editorial Director here. And I'm joined today by Nils Karlson, who is an economist and political scientist, founder of the Ratio Institute in Stockholm, and also a professor in political science at Linköping University. He's going to talk about his new book, Reviving Classical Liberalism Against Populism. We've got a few copies. Nils, let's start with something fairly basic, which is definition, because you use the term populism in a way that's maybe not obvious to everyone. What do you mean by populism? What is that?
Well, some people say you can't even define this concept. I mean, it's used in very different ways, but I've gone through all the academic literature, very huge literature, and I identify three defining characteristics of populist movement, populist leaders. And the first one is unserious, unfounded policies, like saying that we're going to save the jobs by introducing a 10 or 20% tariff, or we're going to reduce crime by only putting everyone into prison or something like this. Simplistic answer to complex problems. I mean, it's a complex society we live in, and populists usually say, I have the answer. I will fix the war. I will fix the economy. Strong men, sometimes strong women say these things. So that's the first characteristics, but that's two more. And the second one, I think, is even more fundamental. So it's a kind of rhetorical style and way of framing things into saying that I represent the true people against the establishment, which is corrupt and evil, while the true people is sound and good and everything. And they deliberately create a we against them position, a deliberate polarization of society, saying that those are bad, we are good, we should be respected, they look down on us, why the establishment, the elites, the neoliberals, the international companies, whatever, the globalists, they are bad, while we, the ordinary hardworking people, the taxpayers, the proletariat, if you want, if you come from the left, are the good people. So you deliberately demonize your opponents. You deliberately, in a way, construct reality. I mean, there's always social problems, there's always change going on, jobs disappearing, new technologies coming, globalization affecting people. But they frame it in this way that there are losers, they are us, and there are winners, those people. And those elites, economists, experts, neoliberals, those are the bad guys, And there are both left and right-wing versions of this. So on the left, it's the classic Marxist argument, basically, that the proletariat, the hardworking people are good, while the capitalists are bad. And this is framed in a slightly different version nowadays. It's global markets, it's international companies, it's the elites, in some sense, that are bad, while the ordinary people are good. You construct reality, you frame things in a rhetorical style doing this. While on the right-wing populists, they are nativists. They talk about the nation. They identify enemies to the people like Muslims or Jews or some kind of minorities that are causing all the problems we're facing. Everything from, lack of jobs or inflation, whatever. So they construct reality in a very similar way, but having a different language, if you want. So this is a very distinctive feature of populist movement. It's a kind of collectivistic identity politics. So it's a collectivistic identity saying that we ordinary people, we fight against those evil people. We have a good cause. They are bad, we are good. And we're not respected, but now these leaders see us and so on. So this is a very forceful logic. And it goes back to people like Friedrich Nietzsche, Carl Schmitt, developed by, I can come back to this later if you want to, current days philosophers, usually from the left, right? The ideas come from the right, but the left has taken over this kind of ideas.
Okay.
The third characteristic, sorry for being a bit long here, is that there's a very clear authoritarian tendency within populism. So they are anti the rule of law, the independence of courts. They are anti, free and fair. They're anti the liberal democracy, constitutional democracy. They like elections, but they don't like the rest of what we call democracy, a constitutional democracy. The respect for minorities, the rule of law, the independence of courts, the kind of things that in the long run makes a liberal society, a democratic society, sustainable and superior, as Churchill said, to all the alternatives we know of. But in small steps, a kind of creeping authoritarian movement, they creep into these systems, by calling it fake elections, and attacking, people who organize things around the democratic system. So these three characteristics, I think, are common to populist movements. They are both left and right-wing versions of this. And I developed this further in the book, of course.
Would you say there are any specific negative outcomes that we can attribute to populism? Because up until here, you could say, well, okay, that's a rhetorical style that we as liberals may not like. But otherwise, what kind of problem does it cause? Why is it necessarily a problem if politics takes place in a way that we may dislike?
There's been some serious economic work done on this. And as you know, perhaps, populism was created by Juan Perón in Argentina in the 1940s. So he'd been to Italy during the war and learned from Mussolini how to run things, but he framed this in a democratic version. So there's been studies looking at Latin America. In Latin America, most populist movements are left-wing, right? Run by the labor unions, left-wing politicians, redistribution, all these kind of things. But there's been studies going through, both right-wing versions, and we have some current examples of this. And it turns out that if you look at 25 episodes of populism in this way in Latin America over a period of 25 years, GDP is 10% lower after those people have been in power. Even the people, poor people, ordinary people who supported those regimes are worse off after these people have been in power. There's also been a recent study looking at worldwide on 50 populist episodes, looking 10 years after people with the populist rhetoric, populist policies or so on were in power, and the results are very, very similar. So having these unseriously founded policies and creating these tensions in society are very destructive to the long-run welfare of a society. It's very clear.
Okay, but is the problem really getting worse? I mean, you must think it is, otherwise you wouldn't have written the book. But when you say it's a style that divides us into good people, bad people, or politicians coming up with unserious proposals, hasn't that always been the case? So this is one of my earliest political memories, is basically politicians promising unrealistic things and then later having to U-turn. What's new here?
It's a matter of degree. I mean, for a long time, people like us, classical liberals, were winning. We thought we had won. And then we left a kind of idea vacuum open to people. We didn't really make our reforms develop better. We didn't keep on reforming. We thought things were good. I mean, the end of history and Fukuyama and all this that all know of. And the problem is, when you let the populists take over, it also influences ordinary parties to a degree that was not the case before.
Right.
If you look at in Europe, all the mainstream parties, Social Democrats, Christian Democratic parties, in this country, conservative parties, labor parties. I mean, public discussion was quite open, with rational, you listened to each other, respected each other. But when you let this populist, pandemic creep into the ordinary parties, having these left and right-wing extremist populist parties arise all over the world, it affects politics in a very dangerous way. And when they really start pushing things in this third dimension that I mentioned, this autocratic tendency that you've seen in Hungary, and you've seen it in Turkey, you've seen it in Poland. Who knows what will happen in France after the next presidential election, in the US after this election, when they actually attack the fundamentals of the constitutional democracy, the pluralistic liberal democracy that we all cherish, then we have a real problem. So that's the situation we're facing. I mean, in all, election campaigns and so on, you will see politicians promising things that are not really serious, that they won't hopefully implement later on. But when you take this to the extreme, when you get having people like this really not caring about the long-run welfare of society, you get into problems. And that's the situation we're in many countries right now.
I'm picking up on one point that you said earlier. You said on the left, the left-wing populists would be Marxists or Marxism-adjacent people. That's quite different from the way populism is normally used in the media. Most of the time it's used in the sense of it's something unthinking, knee-jerk, something that isn't really an ideology, and that appeals to people who are politically uninformed. Now, in this case, the Marxists, you also mentioned Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn in the book, most of the movements that supported them were dominated by graduates. And the same is true of identity politics, and that's all. These are highly educated people. Would you say that there is such a thing as a populism of the graduate class, a populism of the educated?
That's a very interesting question that I haven't really been thinking about. So, the most advanced populist theoreticians, I'm Swedish, so excuse me for my English here, but those are both left-wing. So Ernesto Laclau from Argentina and his wife, Chantal Mouffe, who is a Belgian philosopher. And they developed, explicitly referring to Carl Schmitt, the guy who defined politics, the essence of politics, as being the friend of enemy relationship, the we against them logic. So they say, this is what we as a left movement should do, and they are really intellectuals, they're really academics. The left in the universities love them, You have the Frankfurter School, you have all those people, with identity politics, critical race theory and so on. All academics, very high esteem, not the least in the US, very problematic, humanities, social scientists. Those people are supporting these kind of ideas, and I don't think they would all of them wouldn't call themselves Marxist in this core materialistic way, It's more, Gramscian type of general front type of Marxism, where you should appeal to the large part of society, frame things in a way that you should have other groups collaborating with us. A bit the Leninist idea, like a core elite that really knows what things going on, but we should use this logic in order to frame things that appeals to people that are feeling a bit left behind, not respected, living in the countryside, not being part of the urban globalized life. You're familiar with all this, So they deliberately use this strategy, yeah. And I think, there is an elite left that support this, yeah.
Okay, so there is an elite left, but you also talk about when you define populism, you define it in quite a broad way. So quite a lot of people would qualify for at least some of your descriptions. You mentioned people who complain about an establishment. By that definition, quite a few of the blog posts I've written for this institute would be populist, because I sometimes complain about the cultural establishment, but I think I'm right. There is a cultural establishment. So are populists or partial populists necessarily wrong about everything? What if there is? I mean, you've just talked about a left-wing elite, at least in the cultural sense. If it's correct, is it still populism?
I think, of course, it's legitimate and correct to be opposed to corrupt elites. So one of the core causes for populists is corruption, of course. In countries like Italy, who had, corrupt politicians for a long time, well, there are no real serious parties left. I mean, it's just left and right-wing populists, on both sides. And none of them are serious, of course. And that's why I have these three defining characteristics.
Right.
So in many situations, I'm a classical liberal. I've been fighting the Social Democrats of Sweden all my life. The elites of Sweden are the Social Democrats. And I've been fighting them for good reasons, because their politics were bad. I mean, their policies were unfounded, unserious. They did not attack the democratic institutions,
Right.
So I think I've given many lectures about this book around the world, and people ask me about Milei in Argentina. And Milei has given these fantastic speeches in Davos and very recently in the UN. If you haven't seen those speeches, you should. I mean, he's brilliant in many ways. But the key test here, the really critical test is, will he respect the rule of law? Will he respect the independence of courts? Will he respect what I call the liberal contract? Not in the book, but I've used this during my lectures about this. As liberals, we cannot demonize opponents in a way. We cannot attack courts. We cannot call it fake elections. We cannot, there are many things we cannot do. That's a kind of predicament for liberals. We should behave in a decent way. While the populists don't care about that. They use these kind of strategies all the time. So, to be against elites, to be against fake elites, fake experts, bad policies, we should attack that all the time, of course.
So almost everyone can be a populist except us. So you can be a nationalist populist, social democratic populist, maybe,
I argue in the book,
classical liberal.
I argue in the book that populism is compatible with all ideologies from left to right, socialists, conservatives, but not classical liberals. Mm-hmm. For this very reason, that we cannot do certain things.
Yeah.
They don't hesitate to do these things. They love the idea of identifying enemies to the people of different kinds, It can be capitalists, if you're on the left. People who make too much money, too much profits, dangerous people, bad people, the left say, Or if you're on the right, immigrants, foreigners, Muslims, Jews, whatever you pick out. And you blame those old people for all the bad in society. But we cannot do that. We shouldn't do that. Would NIMBYs count? What's a NIMBY? I don't know.
It's somebody who is against building things. So,
Not in my backyard.
Yeah. People who just obstruct everything because they can. Troublemakers.
No, in all societies we need certain infrastructure projects, we need certain investments in nuclear power or wind power plants or whatever, So, takings is a thing that is part of a civilized open society that we have to respect, that there is a collective good that we have to support within the limits of the rule of law, within the limits of independent courts and so on. There's many things in life and society where there's no easy answers, where you have to strike this balance. But not in my backyard. If you push that too far, society won't work.
Yeah, we can see that here. You've just described this country. Let's talk briefly about the origins of populism, because again, this is, in this sense, the way you use the term differs from how most of the media does it. Most people just use populism as something that's unthinking, knee-jerk, based on gut feelings. But you say there is an ideological underpinning, and it does go back to actual philosophers. You talk about some of the proto-fascists, Carl Schmitt, legal scholar of the Third Reich. And then, firstly, can you elaborate on that? How were these people populist, and how could that then spill over to the Frankfurt School and the neo-Marxists today?
So you can discuss where this starts, but in contrast to the Anglo-Saxon, Scottish tradition where you are empiricist, you care about reality, you test things and so on, there's a continental, more idealistic tradition, and I say it starts with Nietzsche, saying that not only that God is dead, as you probably know he said, but there is really no truth. I mean, there is no reality out there. You can construct reality. And if you can construct what's true and false, that opens up a lot of things, right? So these kind of ideas were developed by Carl Schmitt, but also by Heidegger, the existentialist philosopher who also was a Nazi party member. And their ideas, if you can construct reality, what matters is languages, narratives, constructions of reality, not reality itself. That's not really the important thing. The thing is how you describe it, how you interpret it. So you had people then like Heidegger, Carl Schmitt and others, radical conservatives, if you want, proto-fascists. And those ideas were picked up by the left through the Frankfurter School and partly by postmodernism, also saying that it's language, it's constructions, reality doesn't really matter, So if only narratives matter, sure you heard about narratives, right? Then you can construct these narratives. You can construct what society is all about. That means you can construct things like friend and enemy. Doesn't have to be a real enemy, but you construct this enemy. And you use this we against logic to frame things in a way that appeals to people. Kind of collectivistic identity politics, I say. And you use it for political purposes. And this is where it becomes really, really problematic, And these kind of ideas are used by both the left and the right. And nowadays, I think the left are dominating within academia, while the right in Europe is dominating in politics. In Latin America, it's still the left in politics.
And let's talk about the alternatives as well, or strategies to fight back against populism. Because most of the people who would see themselves as anti-populists would favor technocratic solutions. We've seen this here after the Brexit referendum, so there was a common media narrative that the EU referendum was won on the basis of populist rhetoric, therefore it's illegitimate and it should be ignored. But that is not your approach to things. You're not saying technocracy is the solution to populism. What is your alternative?
My answer is classical liberalism, of course. Fritz says, we haven't done the job. That's basically what I'm saying. As I briefly mentioned, I think we left an idea vacuum out there, So there are many things that don't work in our societies, many mistakes that have been made policy-wise and so on. Lots of people not feeling very happy about how things are developing. So what's the role for us? We should fix that, of course. But the first thing, I have four types of policy solutions to this, or policy solutions. The first one is actually just to explain how populists do. People don't want to live in polarized societies. They don't want to have these kind of policy mistakes going on. So explain to people when you see, at least, in Europe, it's usually from the right, when you see people, using immigrants, Muslims, whatever, deliberately framing things in this way. Explain. This is a populist strategy. They do this deliberately in order to frame this way against damn logic, in order to avoid a serious discussion about policy solution. So that's my first suggestion. I mean, let's undress, if you want, the populist and explain, here, this is what they do. They do this on purpose. They create these narratives, they create this way against damn logic. The second solution is, of course, to secure and develop our own institutions and policies. I mean, we have to do a better job. We have to secure the rule of law. We have to explain why markets, civil society works, spontaneous orders. I mean, Hayek, Buchanan, all this stuff that you all know in this room. But also, I think, to implement policies that really benefits a better education system, better, social mobility, a number of things we could do better. I believe in federalist system, decentralized system, and so on. My third type of policy solution, or if you want, my third solution is based on a thing in a sense of how populists think. It's not all about rational arguments. I mean, the populists don't use rational arguments, right? They use narratives, emotions, these kind of things. We should be better at explaining why a liberal society is a fantastic society to live in, why people can flourish, why we can learn from each other, pluralism, tolerance, respect for others. We haven't done the job explaining why. It's not only about the economy. I mean, people think the economy is all, but it's not all about it. People vote for this populist against economics, if you want, against sound economics. So we have to explain why a classical liberal society is a society which maximizes the chances for people to live meaningful, flourishing lives. And I go back to Wilhelm von Humboldt, to John Stuart Mill, to those kind of thinkers who actually said, we want a liberal society not only because it promotes wealth or prosperity or something, because it promotes, freedom, liberty, emancipation, a good life. Well, what it means to be a living person. In families, in communities, not only super optimistic things, but in a civil society where you can really live meaningful lives. And we haven't done that job. So I think that if I'm going to do a future book, it would be about what I call the liberal spirit. We should develop the liberal spirit, explain why a liberal society is not only about the economy, about wealth, prosperity, all this. It's about living good lives, basically, and meaningful good lives. And my fourth type of solution is that we should support politicians that can do the job. So I favor what I call classical liberal statecraft. Classical liberals can't stay away from politics. We have to get in there. We have to support the good people who can do the job, which is not easy. And they should promote those kind of policies that I just described.
Well, I'm afraid I couldn't name more than 3 of those. But you also say in the book that populists have a natural advantage.
That means you haven't done your job.
Maybe I haven't. You say that populists have a natural advantage over us because they can appeal to a sense of identity, meaning in life, community. And you want to counter that from the liberal side. But can we really do that? Because we can talk in the abstract about how a liberal society doesn't have to be atomistic, that of course people can seek meaning in the community and join all sorts of voluntary associations, but we can't point to any specific one. Whereas the populists can just say, well, there's the people and there's the elite and you are part of the people, therefore you are the good guys. So they themselves provide that community spirit. Can we possibly counter that?
We have done it before. Come on. This country used to support free life, liberty, not only in the UK, but all over the world to certain degrees, The US used to be the same, They used to support these kind of ideas, but both the UK and the US have lost their senses in that way, I think, even Scandinavia, which is more social democratic, I think have supported these kind of ideas, to a certain degree. Taxes are too high and so on, but we have supported and still do, I think, to a high degree than some other countries, why an open classical liberal society is the best society to live in. And that it's about policies, but it's not only about policies. It's about narratives. We should have classical liberal narratives. We should support movie makers, novelists, YouTubers, whatever, social media people, whatever they call influencers, that describe and explain this to ordinary people, while the good life is actually a life that you can live not in a collectivistic identity political society where you have two groups against each other, but in a pluralistic, tolerant society. I think we can do that.
So basically
we've done it before.
Yeah, that's basically the mission of this institute. Is what we're trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think you should be more into this, what I call this liberal spirit. I've been working in this field for my whole life, more or less. We haven't really interacted enough with authors, movie makers, media, theaters. We should get in there. We have good ideas. We have smart people. We have the smartest people. We should be there. And there are, Star Wars, Lord of Rings. Those are classical liberal stories, basically. But we haven't really explained to people that they are classical liberal stories. Our stories are the best. Not this, but we haven't done the job.
And if we're trying to do the job, are we on our own? Is it just liberals versus populists, or are there potential allies?
I think you always have to form... I did another book a couple of years ago called Statecraft on Liberal Reforms. In this book, among other things, I argue that we have to form policy coalitions, advocacy coalitions. So even though we don't agree with people about everything, we should collide with them if they support the right kind of things. Because in the end, if they support the kind of things we like, and if we together can collide with them, let's support.
And could there be someone who is, in some way, a bit populism adjacent? So let's say a coalition with the anti-woke right?
Could be sometimes. But you have to be very careful. Like I said about Milei, people have asked me about Milei many times in Argentina. And I say, I wish him the best of luck. If he would succeed, Argentina is a disaster. It's been a disaster for 80 years or something. If he is the guy who can change this, that would be an amazing task, And I wish him the best of luck, but he has to keep within this classical liberal contract that I defined earlier.
Yeah, best of luck to him. On that note, I'll open to the floor for questions. Yes, we have a question here. Do we have microphones going around, or yeah? Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Thank you, Nils, for a great conversation. I can't wait to read your book. My question is the following. You said you were Swede. Let's assume you're a US citizen. I'm presuming you're not. Would you be voting for the populist Donald Trump or the socialist Kamala Harris?
So I've lived 3 times in my life in the US. So first I went to high school in New Hampshire a long time ago, more than 45 years ago. And then I did my PhD partially at George Mason for Buchanan and people like that. And then I spent 6 months at Stanford University, at Hoover Institution, doing this book, basically. The U.S. have been going this way,
This way in what sense?
Downwards, in many ways. In many ways. They've lost their self-confidence. It's a bit like this country in a sense, no self-confidence, they don't believe in things anymore. They don't stand up for liberty. Politics is a mess. The U.S. is extremely polarized. You don't have a public discussion anymore. I mean, people watch different TV channels. They have different stories. I mean, it's really absurd. Europe is a lot better. I think most countries in Europe is a lot better. The UK is, you still have The Economist, you still have the Financial Times, you still have, compared to most other countries, compared to the US, Europe is a lot better off, But I think Donald Trump is a really dangerous guy. I'm really afraid of Donald Trump, and how the Republican Party has developed, over the last 7 or 8 years. It's absurd. A party that supported, had Ronald Reagan, together with Thatcher and all the big leaders we had 25 years ago now. So I would vote for Harris, because she supports the institutions, the checks and balances and so on, the election system, the independence of courts, I think. I have American friends who used to be what I call classical liberals, who now are strong supporters of Trump, because they think, that wokeism, that the deep state and all this have taken over the state apparatus in the US. But I think Trump is a real danger. Also for the rest of the world. If he would set an example like that, attacking the election results once again, if he loses and so on, that would be very, very problematic. That's Mario.
On that cheerful note, question over here.
Mike.
Thank you very much. You educated me a reasonable amount on classical liberalism and populism. Although you have some doubts that now come into my mind, I have regarded myself as a liberal all my life. Although I vote conservative, I absolutely passionately believe in the rule of law. I believe in honesty. I believe in allowing people to have free speech and all of these things. Now, I'm just curious to know, in that context, where do property rights come into classical liberalism? Do classical liberals believe that property rights are very important, which I do, or do you think they're not important?
I would say that the relationship between the rule of law and private property rights, that's the core of classical liberalism. It's even more important than democratic institutions. If you go back to John Locke and all the thinkers following him, all the way up to Buchanan and Hayek and Friedman and all those people, the core idea is the importance of private property rights and how they are upheld by the rule of law, constitutional government, and hopefully then democratic constitutional government. But it's more important with constitutionalism and the rule of law than it is with democracy, from a classical liberal perspective.
Okay, we had a question from Jamie over here.
Hi. When I used to have Kristian's job, I was on a panel discussion at the Tory party conference. And the topic was, how do we make the case for free markets? And the other panelists all made the case for free markets, but that wasn't the question. The question is, how do we make it?
Yeah.
And I took the view that we should do it. I said, nobody's going to... So you have this optimistic idea that we can make the case for free markets in the way that Friedman and Hayek and these people did, and they're great, and we do all that. But I've become pessimistic about that, because I've been doing it for a long time, and it hasn't worked. And we've all been, banging our heads against the wall. I thought, well, what should we do? Right? Practically, what do we do? And I suggested, I'd like to know what you think about this, and it's probably a little bit populist, I'm afraid to say, that we vilify politicians. And so my thinking was this: when the Britain and America that you love, and I love, that great time, well, Britain didn't have universal suffrage, but never mind that. But one thing that they did have was a spirit of rugged individualism.
Yeah.
And that snake, don't tread on me. And I was thinking, how can we encourage the spirit? We need the population to have that in their guts. It's not an intellectual thing, it's in the guts. And I thought, well, these people who are telling me whether I can have sugar or not, and, every little detail of my life, they're bossing me around, they should piss off. Because I'm a grown man. And who are they to tell me? And that's a kind of vilification strategy. What do you think of that?
As I said, I think we should support what I call the liberal spirit, or even classical liberal spirit. A society that cherishes individual freedom, but also voluntary organizations, communities, whatever, tolerance, pluralism, minorities, all this. I did another book 5-6 years ago called Statecraft and Liberal Reforms. I compared Australia and Sweden on how they liberalized their societies from the mid-1980s up until 2010. So both countries really changed their social models in a very radical way. Cutting down taxes, red tape, regulations, lowering tariffs in the case of Australia, and so on. And in Sweden, it was a game of blame avoidance. You blame others for the mistakes, and then you still made some good reforms. In Australia, the Labour Party said, we want these reforms because it's good for the consumers, it's good for the ordinary people. And they succeeded. They actually did this reform. But it was, of course, a top-down thing. So I think classical liberals have to realize that politics is essentially a top-down game. So I argue that you have to win what I call the central zone of a society. So the central zone is the kind of combined elites in media, culture, corporate sector, politics, not only politics, that's the important thing. It's a wider sense of elite, which some sociologists have named, the central zone. So my institute in Stockholm has always been focused on the central zone of Sweden. We don't care about ordinary voters, we don't care about, winning the population. That's for the politicians. We want to influence the ideas of the people who decides what's really is important. The people who decide what's really is important is not ordinary people. It's a wide elite group that I call the central zone. So that's my strategy for promoting liberalism. I think bottom-up strategies can go either way, often in a very bad way. Sometimes in a good way, but often in a very bad way. So I think the strategy of an institute like the IA or other classical liberal institutes around the world should be focused on the people who really matters when it comes to policy. And it's policy in a very wide sense. It's an understanding. Is profits a good thing or a bad thing? Is market or planning the way to handle the social problems of society? Is entrepreneurship something that is beneficial or a bad thing, How should we look on fairness and inequality? I've been arguing about fair inequality, for example, in Sweden. Annoyed a lot of people. But I think we should take those really core. It's not so much about specific policy ideas. It's more about winning the all-over idea about what really makes a society good. Not only economically good, but good in a deeper sense. So I don't believe in this bottom-up strategies, really. It's more top-down, to be honest.
Can I just add to that on the policies like the ones that you mentioned, sugar reformulation and all that, the petty nanny statism, basically. Most of that isn't... And the trouble is, if you look at YouGov surveys, that stuff is always popular. There's always more than 60% who support it. So it isn't even just a case of bossy politicians trying to force this on an unwilling public. It's more that there is a public demand for it. It may be it may not be strongly felt, it may not be a public priority, but it seems quite unlikely that a government would be chased out of office because they go too far on the nanny-statism. So there is a public demand for it. The majority love this stuff. There's a question here from Sheldon.
Yeah. You mentioned... Hi, I'm Sheldon. You mentioned the core belief that, the idea of the rule of law. So if, for example, there's a thorny issue in UK politics, the European Court of Human Rights, if we were to reject a ruling, would we be in fundamental violation of the rule of law, given that there are other countries in Europe, probably German and the Polish, but there are notable examples where they have not followed the ruling of the ECHR, and I just wanted to know what your opinion is.
Well, I wouldn't know about the specific cases, but in a sense it depends on the starting point. You know, when Sweden joined the European Union in 1995, Sweden had a situation where the courts were totally dependent on government. I mean, the government appointed all the judges. You know, the head judges of the Supreme Court of Sweden were appointed by the majority government in Sweden. It used to be the king that appointed the judges, you know. So for us in Sweden, it was really important to strengthen, by joining the European Union and thereby introducing this European Court of Justice into Swedish legislation at the same time, that really strengthened the rule of law in Sweden. It was very important for Sweden. I remember I was in what's this country, you know, in the Balkans. Anyway, one of the Balkans countries, and they asked me, should we join the European Union? And this was one of the countries, Montenegro, very corrupt country in many ways. I said, one of the reasons you should join, because in this corrupt country, it would strengthen the rule of law. Because the European Court, the Court of the European Union are kind of, you know, division of labor kind of system, you know. We have courts outside your own system, they will uphold certain rights and so on. And that was the effect on Sweden. It strengthened the rule of law in Sweden, you know, by joining the European Union. It would be the same with Montenegro. In the UK, it's a different story. I mean, you have your own tradition with the rule of law. You don't have a written constitution even. But you do have this long tradition. And I've been asked this question before. Do you think that the UK should have a written constitution? And I usually say no. I think sometimes traditions are more important than written documents. You know, in Latin America, they've had written constitutions for 200 years. No one cares about them, you know. Basically the same as the US Constitution, you know, but no one cares about them. So I think your own system of the rule of law, your own system of independence, you know, of the judges making the law and so on, the common law system, in the longer run will be more, you know, conducive to the rule of law than being too adaptive to these European courts. Wasn't an easy answer, but I think that's most. I think I said this before. Most interesting questions don't have easy answers, you know. So it's a question of balance all the time. I think you should stick to your own system. If you don't believe that those courts are doing the right thing, forget them out.
Anyone else? Yes, here in the background.
Hi, I think for me, one of the sort of four of the great inheritances of sort of classical liberalism and Western liberal thought is one, strong property rights, two, individual freedom, three, the rule of law, and four, democracy. But I think of these four inheritances, democracy is sort of fundamentally different in that it's collectivist in nature. And I think that sort of in sort of the present sort of Western political sort of culture, democracy is valued a lot more by people as it ends in itself. People think that democracy is fundamentally a good thing. what I want to ask is in sort of the challenge from the left and where people sort of tend to value the other three less as ends in itself. How do we sort of bring that back and make people love them as much as they love democracy?
I mean, us classical liberals, we care about the long run liberty of society, right? And liberal democracy, constitutional democracy, where you uphold by independent courts, so checks and balances, different chambers, I think about the US, That system has turned out to be the best system in the longer run to secure these rights and liberties, including private property rights and the rule of law. If you abolish democracy, for a short time, you may have a sustainable system. For example, well, there are many interesting examples in the world. Singapore would be an interesting example today, which is quite illiberal in many ways, when it comes to democracy, but very liberal when it comes to markets, private property rights. But in the end, the property rights aren't secure because the individual liberties aren't secure because you all depend on the government. And after a few generations, after the son of the son of the son, probably some corrupt guy will come in there. And there would be nothing but this. I mean, populists like electoral democracy. They like voting systems, to support their own system. But they don't like liberal democracy. They don't like constitutional democracy. So we should support the core of a classical liberal constitutional democracy, not voting systems by themselves.
Thank you. If I understood you, the task is not, as a populist would, to challenge and confront the elite, but instead to try and influence and change the elite by persuasion. But I mean, you don't kick away the ladder that you're standing on. Is the better approach not to do what these people do here and bring young people through, this idea of the rotation of the elites, the circulation of the elite imperative, I think, but that sort of idea, and therefore it's a really long-term process. But I mean, can you realistically change? Did you call it the central zone or the
central zone? Yeah.
Is that possible to change meaningfully?
I mean, I think your question is very good. I mean, when I studied Australia and Sweden over this long period, that's exactly what happened. So new actors within this central zone was created. That became very influential. And remember, I mean, the history of this institution, I was here, when Ralph Harris and Arthur Selden and Margaret Thatcher were the core people here, They were outsiders, but became insiders to the central zone. So they really did the job, They entered into this core part of what really matters when it comes to deciding what's important in society from having been outsiders. But they managed to bring these institutions into the center of the political discussion, in a very successful way. And I think the task is, if they could do it, we can do it. And of course, bringing young people is the core, We have to, bring in the young generations and educate people and so on, for sure. But we have to be, very smart in this and also not only go for the, economic part of society, go for the culture part of society, the humanistic part of society, I would say.
Yes.
Good evening. I have a question. I think that every person has mother and father. So where do you stand? Where liberals stand in this? Because I will give a background. So I come from Latvia, and currently we have in every kindergarten a big debate going around among parents, because little kids are taught that there are gender fluid society. So what is your view of the liberals' view on this?
No, but in this book, I
I populist. I want
I mean, why should liberals be against families? Why should we be against communities? Why should we be against voluntary organizations? I mean, civil society is where most people live their lives, That's what creates meaning for people. Apart from your job, it's your family, basically, which gives you meaning and so on in life. And we should cherish that. We should support that. And I don't think we have that. We've let the conservatives take over this, in a sense, which I find is problematic. They believe that you can organize society as a family, basically. It's like an organism, if you want. We believe that, pluralist ways of living, family-oriented values is fine, Not for everyone, but if you want to live like that, it's up to you, basically. We shouldn't interfere with how people want to live their lives. We should be neutral as far as possible to the good of how people want to live. And I do believe myself that family is extremely important, for sure.
So I'm not populist
No, not at all.
Well, pleased to hear that. On that note, let's draw the formal proceedings to a close. But the bar is still open, so stay for another drink or three.
I just want to say, since the book is open access, you can download it for free. So it's published by Palgrave. So go with my name, Nils Karlson, Palgrave. You can download for free. It's open access. I brought 3 copies. If someone wants to buy them, I have a special price here tonight. High spinning. We have an auction.
Oh, better hurry. Thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you.